The jungle was quiet. Too quiet. Even the wind seemed to hide, afraid to move the branches. Darkness spread across the land as the sun slipped away, leaving long shadows that crawled across the ground. Out of that darkness, a shape appeared. It was big, silent, and dangerous. The alpha predator had returned. Her body was scarred with battles of the past. Her eyes glowed like burning fire in the night. Every step she took was heavy with power. For years she had been away, lost in the void, fighting for survival, searching for the family that was taken from her. Now after all this time she was back. She had one purpose, to find her cubs. The forest remembered her. Trees bent under the pressure of her presence. Birds flew away in fear before her shadow even touched them. The soil itself seemed to shiver when her claws sank into it. She was not just an animal, she was something more. Something older, something designed to rule. The hunters used to whisper her name in fear. To them she was a nightmare. To her cubs she was once a mother. And tonight, the nightmare walked again. The path to the old den was burned into her memory. She knew every rock, every broken tree, every mark left from battles long ago. She had raised her cubs there, deep in the cave under the mountain. That was where they had played. That was where they had learned to roar for the first time. She remembered the sound of their small voices, sharp and wild, filling the cave with life. The alpha's heart, hardened by years of war, softened when she thought of them. They were her blood, her legacy. She had returned to protect them, to bring them back no matter the cost. But something was wrong. As she approached the den, the ground felt strange. The air was heavy, filled with a scent she did not recognize. She lowered her body close to the earth, sniffing, searching, the smell of humans. Her nostrils flared and a growl built deep in her throat. Humans should not be here. Not in this place. Not near her cubs. Fear and anger rushed through her veins. Were they here already? Had they found her children before she could? The den stood silent, its mouth dark like a wound in the mountain. She moved closer, every step careful, her claws clicking softly against stone. Her ears twitched, listening for the sound of her cubs, the sound of life. Nothing. Only silence. The alpha pushed her head inside. The cave was cold, the walls lined with scratches from long ago. Marks left by tiny claws. Marks left by her cubs when they were young. She touched the wall with her paw, remembering. The memory hurt. She could almost hear their laughter. But the cave was empty. Her roar exploded inside the den, echoing like thunder. The sound shook the stones and rolled out into the night. It was not a roar of triumph. It was a roar of rage and loss. She stepped back, her chest heaving. The ground outside the den caught her attention. There were footprints. Not animal, not her cubs. These were hard, sharp, deep marks in the soil. Metallic. Heavy. They glowed faintly in the moonlight, as if machines had walked here. She lowered her head, sniffing the prints. The scent stabbed her heart. It was familiar. It was her cubs. But mixed with it was iron, steel, and oil. Not the scent of fur. Not the scent of wild blood. Something had changed. Something terrible. Her cubs were no longer living freely in the wild. They were trapped, covered, hidden inside something not their own. Human hands had touched them. Human machines had surrounded them. The alpha felt her stomach twist with fear. She lifted her head, scanning the horizon. The forest was not the same. Strange lights flickered in the distance. The smell of smoke and burning metal filled the air. Somewhere out there, her cubs were alive. She could feel it. But they were different now. Not just hers anymore. Something else had claimed them. The night grew colder and the stars above seemed sharp like knives. The alpha predator stood tall, her muscles tense, her claws digging into the dirt. She had fought armies before. She had destroyed machines that tried to hunt her. But this was worse. If her cubs were changed, if they were no longer wild, what would she face? Were they still hers? Or had the humans stolen them completely? Her heart was heavy, but her rage was stronger. She raised her head to the sky and let out another roar, louder than before. The sound spread across the land, a warning to every creature, every hunter, every human. The alpha had returned, and she would not rest until she found her children. Far away in the darkness, a pair of glowing eyes watched her. Cold, calculating, not animal, not natural. Something was waiting, something that knew she had come back. The alpha could not see it yet, but she felt it. Her story was only beginning. The hunt was about to start again. The forest floor was covered in strange marks. The alpha predator followed them with sharp eyes. These were not the soft paw prints of wild animals. They were deep, heavy, and perfect in shape, like they were pressed by metal feet. The ground was broken where the steps had landed. Small circles burned into the soil. This was no natural sign. Something powerful had passed through here, something human-made. The Alpha lowered her head and sniffed the trail. Her nostrils flared, her breath thick. Beneath the bitter smell of metal and oil, there was something else. A scent she knew as well as her own blood. It was her cubs. Their smell was mixed with the cold stink of machines. Her muscles tightened. Her claws scraped against the earth. Her children were close. But what had humans done to them? The forest was not silent anymore. Strange sounds carried through the air. A low hum like machines breathing, a steady thumping like the march of soldiers. The Alpha crouched low, her body pressed to the ground. Her eyes glowed in the moonlight as she moved forward without a sound. Each step brought her closer to the source of the noise. Each heartbeat reminded her of the risk. Then she saw movement. At first it was only shadows between the trees. But the shadows were too tall, too wide, moving with purpose. They were not hunters from the village. They were not animals either. They moved like soldiers. The Alpha's ears turned, catching their heavy steps. She kept to the darkness, slipping between branches, her body hidden but ready to strike. The figures came into view, tall, armored, glowing faintly under the broken light of the moon. The Alpha's eyes narrowed. She had fought humans before, armored in steel, armed with fire and blades. But these were different. Their movements were too fluid. Their armor too alive. They looked like machines shaped in the form of men. She stepped closer, every muscle tense until she could see their faces. And then she froze. Behind the glass of those helmets, she saw something that ripped her heart open. Eyes, not the cold eyes of human soldiers, not the dead shine of machines. These were the eyes of her cubs. Older now, stronger, but still carrying the wild spark she had once seen when they were young. They stared from behind the steel mask, their breath misting the glass. Her cubs, her children, the Alpha could not move. For a moment the world around her seemed to stop. She had dreamed of this moment, the day she would find them again. But this was not the reunion she had imagined. They were not free. They were trapped inside armor, their bodies covered in human design, their roars silenced by machines. One cub turned its head sharply, as if it had felt her presence. Their eyes locked. For a second, a flash of recognition sparked. The Alpha's heart leapt. Did they know her? Could they still remember their mother? She took one step forward, slow and careful, her massive body emerging from the shadows. The armored cubs stiffened. Their claws, now metal blades attached to their suits, gleamed in the moonlight. They raised their weapons, pointing them toward the trees. Their movements were perfect, trained as if they had done this many times before. The Alpha's chest tightened. She growled low, not in anger, but in longing. The sound rolled across the forest floor, deep and powerful, the same call she had used years ago to summon them home. One cub flinched. Its hand trembled. The sound touched something inside, beneath the steel, beneath the training. The memory of blood and family stirred. But before anything more could happen, another figure stepped out of the shadows. It was a human. The Alpha's eyes burned with hate. The man wore a black uniform, his face pale and cruel. His eyes shone with pride as he looked at the armored cubs standing tall before him. He raised a hand, and the cubs instantly straightened like soldiers obeying their commander. The human's smile was thin, sharp as a knife. He knew who the Alpha was. He knew what this moment meant. The Alpha bared her teeth, her roar building in her chest. But she held it back. She could not attack, not yet. Her cubs stood in front of him, ready to obey his command. Her mind raced. Were they prisoners? Or had the humans twisted them into weapons that served willingly? The human commander's voice was calm, mocking. He spoke words that cut through the night. Though the Alpha could not understand his language, she understood his tone. He was in control. He owned them. The cubs did not move toward her, but they did not lower their weapons either. They stood frozen, caught between the command of the man and the call of their mother. Their glowing eyes flickered as if a war was happening inside their minds. The Alpha took another step closer, her growl rising. She needed to reach them. She needed to break whatever chains held them. Her blood boiled at the thought that humans had taken her children and turned them into machines. The forest grew tense, every sound swallowed by the weight of the moment. The cubs' eyes burned through their helmets, locked on her. The human commander's smile widened, his hand ready to give an order. The alpha lowered her body, muscles coiled like steel. Her claws dug deep into the soil. Something was about to break, and in that silent space between breath and battle, the alpha knew one truth. Her cubs were alive. But they were no longer hers alone. They belonged to two worlds now, the wild blood of their mother and the cold steel of the humans. The night held its breath, waiting to see which side they would choose. The alpha predator did not move. Her breath came out in slow clouds of steam. Her eyes locked on the glowing faces inside the helmets. She had waited years to find her cubs. Now they were standing before her, but they were not free. They were wrapped in steel, standing like soldiers, their bodies hidden under human armor. Her heart ached, but her rage burned hotter. For a moment the forest was frozen. The only sound was the low hum of machines built into the suits. The alpha tilted her head, studying them carefully. The cubs were taller now, their frames stronger. Time had changed them, but she could still see the small things only a mother would notice. The way one tilted his head before stepping, the way the other's eyes narrowed when watching danger. They were hers. She knew it, and yet they looked nothing like the wild children she had raised. The human commander stepped forward, his boots heavy against the soil. He looked proud, like he had done something impossible. His hand waved across the armored cubs as if he was showing off his creations. His voice carried in the still air, words sharp and confident. The alpha did not understand his language, but she understood his meaning. He was their master now. He had taken them, shaped them, stolen their loyalty. The alpha's lips pulled back, showing long, sharp teeth. A growl rose in her throat, shaking the ground under her paws. The human smiled, unafraid. He had soldiers, her own cubs, to stand between them. He raised his hand, a simple command, and her children moved as one. Their weapons came alive, glowing with blue energy, humming with deadly power. The sound tore at her heart. These were not the natural roars of hunters. These were human tools of war. Still, the alpha did not attack, not yet. She stared at her cubs, searching their eyes through the glass of their helmets. For a heartbeat, she saw something familiar. Their gazes softened just slightly, as if they knew her, as if a memory from years ago was pushing against the control of the armor. They hesitated. Their weapons trembled. The human noticed it too. His smile faded. He shouted another command, his voice sharp and cruel. The hesitation vanished. The cubs straightened, their weapons steady once more. The alpha felt her chest tighten. They were fighting inside. Somewhere beneath the metal and training, her cubs were still alive, still hers. But the human's grip was strong. She took a step forward. The forest floor cracked under her weight. She lowered her head, letting out a deep rumbling call. It was not a roar of rage. It was the sound she used long ago to call her cubs back to her side. A mother's call. A sound filled with memory, safety, and love. The armored figures shifted. One stepped forward ever so slightly, as if the sound had broken through the machine's walls. The commander shouted again, louder this time. His hand cut through the air, demanding obedience. The cub froze in place, torn between two worlds. The alpha's eyes blazed with fury. She knew now. They were not soldiers by choice. They were trapped. They were prisoners inside their own bodies. The silence grew heavy. The alpha could hear the beating of her own heart. She could hear the sharp mechanical breaths of her cubs inside the helmets. She could hear the human's voice dripping with control. Her mind raced. If she attacked, she might lose them. If she stayed still, they would be dragged away from her again. The forest seemed to lean in, waiting for her decision. Her cub's eyes met hers again. This time, the flicker of memory was stronger. She saw it clearly. Fear, confusion, and something else. Longing. They remembered her. Not fully, not clearly, but enough to hesitate. The alpha's chest swelled with hope and pain all at once. They were alive inside those cages of steel. They still knew her. The human commander's face twisted with anger. He pointed at her, his voice breaking the night. The order was clear. Attack. The cubs lifted their weapons higher, energy buzzing, ready to strike. The alpha's body stiffened. Her blood roared in her veins. She could not let this happen. For a split second, time seemed to slow. The cubs stood between her and the commander, caught between obedience and instinct. Their glowing eyes flickered like a flame struggling against the wind. The alpha dug her claws deep into the soil. She was ready to fight. But deep inside, she was praying that her cubs would remember who they were. The forest around them waited, silent, as if holding its breath. One step, one sound, one choice, and the battle would begin. The alpha's growl rumbled low, filled with both love and fury. She stared at her cubs, her voice unspoken but clear. "Remember me. Remember who you are." And for the first time she saw one of them hesitate long enough to lower his weapon, just an inch, just a fraction. It was small, but it was hope. The human commander's eyes widened in shock, realizing he was losing control. The alpha's heart pounded. Her cubs were still hers. Somewhere inside, they were still fighting to return. But the night was not over. The struggle had only just begun. The air was heavy. The alpha predator stood firm, her body low, her eyes locked on the cubs. They were so close, yet so far. Her call had reached them, she knew it. For a moment, one cub had lowered its weapon. But then the human's command had broken through again. The glow in their eyes flickered between obedience and memory. It was a war inside their minds, a war she could not see but could feel in her heart. Her growl rumbled low, carrying across the trees. It was not the growl of anger. It was the growl of a mother reminding her children who she was. The sound rolled into the silence, pulling at the cubs' instincts. Their heads tilted slightly, their bodies trembling under the weight of two masters. On one side, the human who had trained them, forced them, bound them to his control. On the other side, the blood that ran through their veins, the bond of family, the call of the wild. The human commander's patience began to crack. His voice rang out sharp and angry, echoing against the trees. He barked a single order, and his meaning was clear: attack. The cubs raised their weapons once again, but their movements were not smooth this time. They hesitated, their hands shaking, their aim uncertain. They were torn apart inside. The alpha could feel their struggle. She stepped forward slowly, her massive body glowing faintly in the moonlight. Her chest rose and fell with deep breaths, her muscles tight and ready. She did not want to fight them. She wanted to break the chains around them. She wanted them to remember the den, the warmth of her side, the sound of their first roars. She wanted them to remember love. She roared again, this time louder, her voice shaking the earth. But it was not only rage, it was memory. It was a voice that spoke of nights under the stars, of hunting together, of blood shared between family. The cubs flinched at the sound, their armor rattling as if the memory was breaking through the walls built around them. One cub lowered its weapon again, eyes wide, breaths fast. The alpha's heart leapt with hope, but the human commander saw it too. His eyes narrowed and his mouth twisted in anger. He shouted again, pointing at the alpha, his command like a whip cracking across the cubs' minds. The hesitation began to fade. The weapons rose once more, glowing, humming with deadly power. The alpha could feel her heart tearing in two. If they attacked, she would have to fight. But if she fought, she could hurt them. She could lose them forever. Her claws dug deep into the soil and her tail whipped behind her in frustration. The commander smirked, confident in his control, confident that blood would soon spill. Then something happened. One cub stepped forward. His weapon was still in his hand, but his movements were slow, unsure. He looked at the alpha, his eyes glowing but softening, trembling with confusion. His chest rose and fell quickly as if he was breathing two worlds at once. The alpha's gaze locked onto his, unbroken, fierce. Her growl softened into a low call, the sound of comfort, of recognition. She knew him. She remembered the small scar above his eye, the scar he had gotten as a cub when he had tumbled into a sharp rock while chasing his sibling. That scar was still there, hidden under the helmet, but she remembered. She always remembered. The cub froze, his weapon shaking. The commander barked another order, this one desperate. The second cub stepped forward this time, weapon steady, aimed directly at her. The alpha's heart clenched. One cub wavered. One cub obeyed. The battle inside them was tearing them apart. The alpha took another slow step, her head low, her growl rolling like thunder. She was not afraid of the weapons. She was afraid of losing her children. She wanted them to see her not as a target, not as an enemy, but as their mother. But the commander had had enough. He raised his hand high and shouted a final order. The cubs' bodies stiffened. The weapons in their hands glowed brighter, buzzing with power. The alpha could feel the danger. Any second now the blast would come. Her body tensed, her claws carving into the ground. She was ready to leap, to strike, but her eyes stayed fixed on her cubs. She wanted them to see her, to remember her, to choose her. The forest held its breath. Even the wind stopped moving, waiting for what would happen. The first cub took a step closer to her. His weapon lowered again, slower this time, heavier, as if he was fighting against invisible chains. The second cub's weapon trembled, his breath growing louder inside the helmet. The alpha roared once more, pouring everything into it. Her love, her rage, her pain, her memories. The sound crashed into the night like a storm. The cubs froze. Both of them. Their weapons shook violently in their hands. Their eyes flickered, glowing and dimming like fire trapped in glass. For a heartbeat, the alpha saw it. She saw them. Not soldiers, not machines, not weapons, her cubs, her children. The commander's face twisted with fury. He shouted, desperate, his voice breaking as he tried to pull them back under his control. But the cubs did not move. They stood frozen, caught between two masters, between steel and blood. The alpha's body was coiled, ready for whatever would come. If they chose her, she would fight to free them. If they chose the human, she would still fight, even if it broke her. The night was full of tension, every shadow stretched, every sound sharp. The cubs trembled, their glowing eyes burning brighter, their bodies shaking as the choice tore them apart. And then, the commander screamed the word that broke the silence. Attack! The cubs moved, but not with the same smooth obedience as before. Their steps were slow, uneven, trembling with conflict. The alpha's eyes burned with both hope and dread. The struggle inside her children was not over. The real battle had only just begun. The forest exploded with sound. The commander's order had broken the silence, and the cubs moved. Their weapons lit up with burning blue energy, casting long shadows across the trees. The ground shook as the armored figures stepped forward, their movements heavy but sharp, their eyes glowing brighter than the moon. The alpha predator braced herself, her claws tearing into the dirt, her body ready to strike. Her heart screamed inside her chest. She did not want to fight them. They were her children, but the humans had twisted them, forced them into weapons. She could not let herself be destroyed, and she could not allow the human commander to keep them. Her muscles coiled like a spring. With one roar that shook the night, she launched forward. The first clash was fire and steel. The alpha slammed into one cub, her claws scraping against the metal armor. Sparks flew, the sound sharp and painful. The cub staggered but did not fall. His training held strong. He swung his arm, the weapon humming with power, slicing through the air where her head had been just seconds before. She dodged, the blade cutting a tree clean in half behind her. The tree groaned and fell, crushing the ground with a deafening crash. The second cub attacked from the side, fast, too fast, his armor enhancing every movement. The alpha spun, her tail whipping like a hammer, knocking him back into the dirt. The ground cracked under his weight, but he rose again, unhurt, the armor glowing brighter. The alpha's chest heaved with rage and sorrow. Every strike she made was against her own blood. Every roar was filled with pain. The commander stood at a distance, his arms crossed, his cruel smile glowing under the moonlight. He watched as the cubs and their mother clashed as if it were a show made only for him. His eyes gleamed with pride. To him, this was victory, the proof that his creations were stronger than nature itself. But the alpha did not give up. Her body moved with primal fury, her instincts sharper than any machine. She darted between trees, using the shadows, forcing the cubs to chase her. Their weapons burned holes in the ground, scorching the soil, but she kept moving faster, wilder, untamed. She leapt high, crashing down with claws aimed at the glowing chest of one cub. The strike left deep scratches in the armor, sparks flying. The cub stumbled back, but still he stood, refusing to fall. The alpha's heart twisted. They were strong, too strong, not because of the wild, not because of their blood, but because of the armor humans had wrapped around them. She could feel the difference. These were not the free cubs she once knew. These were soldiers bound to human control. Every strike against them was like striking chains made of steel, but even as they fought, she saw it. A flicker in their movements, a hesitation in their attacks. When she looked into their eyes, she saw the struggle. They were not empty machines. Inside the glowing helmets, her cubs still lived. And they were fighting something stronger than her claws, the human's grip on their minds. The first cub charged, his weapon humming with deadly power. The alpha leapt aside, but not far enough. The blade slashed across her shoulder, leaving a deep wound that burned with pain. Her roar split the night, a cry of both fury and agony. Blood dripped down her fur, dark and heavy. But she did not fall. Her eyes blazed brighter. Pain only made her stronger. She turned and slammed her body into him, knocking him hard against a tree. The tree cracked and broke, collapsing under the force. The second cub tried to trap her, his weapon raised high. The alpha spun, claws flashing, and knocked the weapon away. The sound of metal against stone rang out, the weapon clattering into the dirt. For a moment, the cub just stood there unarmed, breathing heavily. His glowing eyes flickered, uncertain. He did not move. The alpha saw it. Hesitation, doubt, memory. She lowered her growl, speaking through her eyes. She was not only their enemy, she was their mother. She called to them without words, her voice buried deep in the bond of blood. For a heartbeat, the cub did not attack. For a heartbeat, he remembered, but the commander roared in anger. His voice was like fire, forcing the cub back into obedience. The unarmed cub reached for his weapon again, his body shaking as if two voices pulled him in opposite directions. The alpha's chest tightened with both pride and sorrow. They were still in there, still fighting. But the battle inside them was tearing them apart. The fight raged on. The ground burned, trees fell, smoke filled the air. The alpha's fur was marked with cuts, her blood mixing with the dirt. The cub's armor bore deep scratches, proof of her strength. But neither side gave in. The forest became a battlefield of claws and steel, roars and blasts, love and rage. The alpha could feel her strength fading, but her will did not break. She knew she could not stop. Every moment she fought, every strike she made was not just to survive. It was to remind her cubs of who they were, to wake them from the chains humans had locked around their souls. She could not kill them. She could not let them kill her. She had to hold them, keep them close, fight until the truth broke free. The commander's laughter echoed across the flames. To him, this was entertainment. But to the alpha, this was war for her family's soul. And as the night burned around them, she saw it again. In the flicker of their eyes and the tremble of their hands. The cubs were fighting back, not against her, but against the chains of the human. The bond of blood was not gone. It was still there, deep inside. And with every roar, every clash, every moment, it was growing stronger. The alpha predator bled, but she did not break. Her cubs struck, but they did not kill. The battle was far from over. But somewhere in the fire and shadows, a new hope was born. Smoke filled the air, rising like black clouds between the trees. The ground was torn open with deep scars from weapons and claws. The alpha predator stood tall, her body bleeding, her chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. Across from her, her cubs stood in their human armor, glowing eyes fixed on her, weapons shaking in their hands. The battle had slowed, but the tension was heavier than ever. The commander still watched from a distance, his cruel smile stretching wider as if he believed he had already won. The alpha lowered her head, her golden eyes burning with something stronger than rage. It was not only anger that kept her standing. It was love. Love for the cubs who once played in her den, who once slept against her side, warm and safe. She remembered the small sounds of their breathing as they dreamed, the way their tiny paws had reached for her when they were afraid. That bond had not died. It could not die. Not even steel and human machines could destroy it. She let out a low call, not a roar this time, but a soft, rolling sound that carried across the smoke and flames. It was the sound of comfort, of a mother calling her children home. The cubs froze. Their glowing eyes flickered, their weapons trembling. Something inside them responded, a memory, a feeling. One cub stepped forward, his helmet tilting as if he was listening to something far away, something hidden inside his own heart. The alpha's chest tightened. He remembered. She could see it in the way his weapon dropped slightly, the way his body shook. The commander's voice cut through the night like a blade. He shouted another order, his tone sharp and angry, demanding obedience. The cub froze in place, caught between two worlds. His body wanted to obey the human, but his soul was reaching for his mother. The alpha took a slow step forward, her eyes never leaving his. She remembered him as the smallest of her cubs, the one who had always been afraid of the dark. She had comforted him on long nights, wrapping her body around him to keep him warm. She growled softly now, the same sound she had once used to calm him as a child. His weapon shook violently. His head turned toward the commander, then back toward her. His chest rose and fell with heavy, broken breaths. Then the truth began to reveal itself. The alpha saw something hidden in the armor. Strange marks, human symbols glowing faintly. Her eyes narrowed. She remembered battles with humans long ago. They had taken wild beasts, cut them open, filled them with wires and machines. They had made weapons out of life itself. And now she understood. Her cubs were not simply wearing armor. The armor had become part of them. The humans had merged flesh with steel, beast with machine. Her cubs had not just been captured, they had been remade. The Alpha's body shook with fury. She roared, her voice thundering through the battlefield. It was not only anger at the commander. It was grief, pain so deep it burned her from the inside. Her cubs cried out in response. Their voices came through the helmets, distorted but real. One word reached her ears, broken and weak, "Mother." The sound tore through her heart. She staggered back a step, not from pain but from shock. They remembered. Even after all the humans had done to them, they remembered. The bond was not gone. It was still alive, buried under steel and commands. The commander shouted again, furious, his control slipping. He waved his arm, demanding the cubs strike. But they hesitated. Both of them this time. Their weapons lowered. Their breathing grew heavier and their glowing eyes softened. The Alpha's chest swelled with hope. She had not lost them. Not completely, but the truth was cruel. They were trapped. The armor hummed, sparks of energy crawling along its surface. The humans had built fail-safes, machines inside the suits that punished disobedience. The cubs cried out, their bodies shaking as the armor forced them to obey. Their pain filled the air, sharp and unbearable. The Alpha roared and charged forward, striking at the suits with her claws, desperate to free them. Sparks burst as her claws tore across the metal. But the armor held. The cubs staggered, caught between her attacks and the humans' control. Their voices cried again, distorted but clear enough to shatter her soul. "Help us." Her heart broke. Every strike she made against the armor was like striking her own children. But she could not stop. She had to fight for them, not against them. Her roars filled the night, echoing with rage and sorrow. The commander laughed, his voice cutting through the chaos. He believed he had already won. He thought his creations would never break free. But he did not understand the bond of blood, the strength of family. The Alpha knew her cubs were fighting inside, pushing against the chains, reaching for her. The battle around them slowed. The flames burned lower. The forest seemed to wait, holding its breath. The Alpha stood tall, her body marked with blood and fire, her eyes burning brighter than ever. The cubs knelt in the dirt, their weapons heavy in their hands, their voices breaking through the machines again and again. "Mother, help us." The Alpha took one last step forward, lowering her head until her eyes were level with theirs. Her growl softened, becoming a steady rhythm, the same rhythm that had once lulled them to sleep as newborns. The cubs' glowing eyes flickered, then dimmed as if the human's control was slipping. The commander screamed in rage, his voice cracking, his control unraveling. He raised his weapon, ready to strike the Alpha himself. But the cubs moved. Not against her, against him. For the first time, their bodies fought against the chains. Their heads turned, their glowing eyes burned with fury. The bond was breaking through. The Alpha's heart filled with fire. The truth was out. They were not soldiers by choice. They were prisoners, and now they were calling to her for freedom. The night was not silent anymore. It was alive with hope. The night had reached its breaking point. Smoke drifted through the broken forest, glowing with the light of distant flames. The Alpha predator stood tall, her body torn with wounds but her spirit unbroken. In front of her, the cubs knelt in the dirt, their armor sparking, their breathing ragged. They were not machines. They were not soldiers. They were her children, and they were fighting against the chains that humans had forced upon them. The human commander's face twisted with fury. He had lost control. His voice cracked as he shouted orders, his words cutting like knives, but the cubs no longer obeyed so quickly. Their movements were slow, shaky, filled with hesitation. One lifted his weapon, but his hands trembled, the weapon slipping slightly as if it had grown too heavy to hold. The other dropped to his knees, clutching at his helmet as if trying to tear it away. Sparks crawled along his armor, punishing him for resisting, but still he fought. The Alpha stepped closer. Her chest rumbled with a low growl, not one of rage but of strength and reassurance. It was the voice of the wild, the voice of home. The cubs looked at her, their glowing eyes flickering like fading lights. They were near the edge of breaking free, and she would not let them fall. She called to them with her voice, with her presence, with every part of her being. The commander raised his own weapon, his eyes burning with desperation. If the cubs would not obey, then he would kill their mother himself. He leveled the glowing barrel at the Alpha's chest, a cruel smile cutting across his face. But before he could fire, one of the cubs moved. The smaller cub, the one who had always been cautious, leapt forward with sudden force. His armored hand struck the commander's weapon aside. The blast went wild, tearing a tree apart in a shower of sparks. The commander stumbled back, his eyes wide with shock. For the first time, the chains of obedience had broken. The cub's glowing eyes blazed with something new: defiance. The other cub staggered to his feet. His armor sparked as the machines inside fought to control him, but he tore free step by step. His weapon clattered to the ground, abandoned. He looked at his mother, his voice breaking through the helmet, raw and filled with pain. "We remember." The Alpha's roar tore into the night, a roar of triumph and sorrow combined. Her cubs were waking. The bond was stronger than steel, stronger than commands. They were still hers. The commander screamed, his fury uncontrolled. He drew a smaller weapon from his side and pointed it directly at the cub who had defied him. His finger tightened on the trigger, but before he could fire, the Alpha lunged. She moved like lightning, her claws flashing. The commander's weapon shattered in his hands, sparks exploding as he fell back into the dirt. He scrambled away, shouting curses, but the Alpha ignored him. Her focus was only on her cubs. She stood between them and the human, her body like a wall of muscle and fury. The cubs shook violently as the armor fought them, but their voices grew louder. One helmet cracked, the glass splitting under the pressure. A faint glow of eyes looked out, not cold, not controlled, but alive and wild. Tears mixed with sparks as the cub reached up, pulling at the helmet. With a final wrench, the steel mask broke away, crashing into the dirt. His face was revealed. Older now, scarred, but still her child. His eyes filled with tears as he looked at her, whispering again, "Mother." The Alpha stepped closer, her head lowering until her nose brushed his forehead. For the first time in years, she felt him without the barrier of steel. Her heart pounded with both joy and grief. One cub was free. One was hers again. The second cub still struggled, his armor locking tight, sparks flying as the failsafes activated. He screamed, the sound breaking through the machines, a sound of both pain and defiance. The Alpha roared beside him, her voice carrying strength into his soul. His brother reached for him, their hands locking together. The bond between them grew stronger, pulling him away from the human's chains. With one final cry, he tore at the helmet, ripping it free. His face appeared bloodied but alive, his eyes wide with freedom. Both cubs stood before her now, no longer hidden behind steel. They were bruised, scarred, but they were alive. They remembered. The Alpha's chest swelled with pride, her eyes glowing brighter than ever. She had won them back. The commander, however, was not done. His rage boiled over as he stumbled to his feet, pulling yet another weapon from his belt. His hands shook, but his eyes burned with hate. He screamed, charging forward, ready to destroy what he could not control. But he did not reach them. The cubs moved together, their strength no longer bound by machines. They leapt as one, knocking him to the ground. His scream was cut short as their claws, sharp and true, tore the weapon from his grip and left him broken in the dirt. His control was gone forever. The Alpha stood over him, her shadow swallowing him whole. She could end him with one strike. But she did not need to. He was already defeated. The forest grew quiet again, the smoke drifting into the sky. The flames began to die, leaving only ash and silence. The Alpha turned to her cubs, her body aching but her heart alive. They stood beside her now, no longer soldiers, no longer weapons, but family. Their faces were scarred, their eyes haunted, but the bond between them had returned. For a long moment, none of them moved. They simply breathed together, mother and children reunited at last. The night air was cold, but the warmth of blood and love was stronger. But deep inside, the Alpha knew this was not the end. Humans had done this once. They would try again. They would always seek to twist life into machines, to steal freedom for power. The fight was not finished. This was only the beginning of a greater war. The cubs looked at her, their eyes steady, filled with both fear and strength. They were ready to follow her now, not as soldiers, not as prisoners, but as her children. The Alpha lifted her head high, her roar echoing across the forest. It was not just a roar of victory. It was a promise to protect, to fight, to never lose them again. And as the sound carried into the night, the stars above seemed to burn brighter, as if the universe itself was listening. The Alpha predator had returned. Her cubs were hers again,